I don't care what you say, that dog isn't a real service dog. Madison Pierce crossed her arms, blocking the automatic doors of PetSmart as the elderly Asian man stood patiently before her, one hand resting on the harness of a German shepherd that sat perfectly still at his side. Old people always fake disabilities to bring their pets shopping. I'm not falling for it. Victor Chang, 79 years old, his face weathered by time and memories most people couldn't fathom, simply nodded. I understand your concern, miss. But Duke here is certified. I have documentation. Madison rolled her eyes. Sure you do. They all say that. She turned to help another customer, dismissing Victor entirely, leaving him standing at the entrance with a dog trained to detect the onset of panic attacks before they overwhelmed the man who'd once held a fire base alone for 8 hours while his entire unit evacuated under fire. If you believe service dogs and the veterans who need them deserve respect and accommodation, type respect in the comments. Victor Chang had driven 40 minutes to this PetSmart in suburban Phoenix because his regular store had been out of the specific food Duke required. The German Shepherd was 3 years old, meticulously trained and certified through the VA's service dog program for veterans with PTSD. Duke wore a proper vest, clearly marked, "Service Dog, Do Not Pet," and his behavior was impeccable. Calm, focused, alert to Victor's needs in ways that went beyond what most people could see. Victor needed Duke. The panic attacks had started in 1985, a full year after he'd come home from his final deployment, as if his mind had waited until peacetime to process what war had demanded of it. They'd gotten worse over the decades, unpredictable episodes where his heart would race, his breathing would shallow, and the past would crash into the present with devastating force. Duke could sense the chemical changes in Victor's body 10 minutes before an attack hit, giving Victor time to find a safe place, to use his breathing techniques, to ground himself in the present. The dog had given Victor back a measure of independence he'd thought lost forever. Now, standing at the entrance to a pet store, Victor felt the familiar flutter in his chest that signaled stress, and Duke shifted slightly, his nose nudging Victor's hand in the subtle way that meant, "I'm here, you're safe." Madison Pierce had worked at PetSmart for 6 months, a job she'd taken while figuring out what to do with her life after dropping out of college. She considered herself savvy, street smart, someone who couldn't be fooled by the usual tricks customers tried. She'd read articles online about people who faked service animal credentials to bring their badly behaved pets into stores, and she'd appointed herself the guardian against such fraud. In her mind, she was protecting the store, maintaining standards, doing her job well. What she lacked was wisdom, the kind that comes from experience and humility and recognizing that you don't know everything just because you know something. She looked at Victor and saw what she expected to see. An old man trying to scam the system, probably lonely and wanting company, using a dog that was likely just a pet. She didn't see the steel beneath the quiet exterior, the weight of decades carried with grace, or the reality that some wounds never fully heal but are managed day by day with help from sources unexpected and essential. "You need to leave," Madison said when Victor approached the counter again, having waited patiently for 15 minutes while she helped other customers. "I already told you, no fake service dogs." Victor's voice remained calm, though Duke had moved closer to his leg, sensing the rising stress. "Miss, I'm not trying to cause problems. I just need to buy food for Duke. I have his certification, my VA card, everything you need to verify." "The VA card doesn't prove the dog is real," Madison interrupted. "Anyone can get one of those cards." She'd never actually seen a VA card, had no idea what they looked like or what they proved, but she'd committed to her position, and pride wouldn't let her back down. Victor reached for his wallet, moving slowly, and Madison's eyes narrowed. "Are you going to try to bribe me? Because that's not going to work either." The accusation hung in the air, and Victor froze. Other customers had stopped shopping, watching the confrontation unfold. An elderly man was being denied entry, his service dog sitting perfectly behaved beside him, while a young employee escalated the situation based on nothing but her own assumptions. One customer, a middle-aged woman with a cart full of cat supplies, stepped forward. "Excuse me, but that dog is clearly trained. Look at his vest, his behavior. This man isn't—" Madison whirled on her. "Ma'am, I'm doing my job. Store policy is that I can refuse entry to any animal I believe isn't a legitimate service animal." It wasn't actually store policy, or at least not the way Madison was interpreting it, but she'd convinced herself she had the authority. Victor closed his wallet, decision made. "It's all right," he said softly. "I'll go somewhere else." His hands trembled slightly as he turned, Duke moving with him in perfect sync, and the flutter in his chest had become a storm, the edges of his vision starting to tunnel in the way that meant an attack was coming. He made it to his car, an old Honda with a veteran license plate, before his breathing became labored. Duke was already working, pressing against Victor's legs with his full weight, providing the physical grounding that helped. Victor focused on the dog's warmth, his solid presence, counting breaths the way his VA therapist had taught him. 4 counts in, hold for 7, 8 counts out. The parking lot dissolved and reformed as a different place, a forward operating base where incoming mortars sounded like thunder, where the screams of wounded men mixed with return fire, where Victor had been the only NCO left alive and the decision to stay or run had been his alone to make. He'd stayed. For 8 hours he'd held that position, returning fire, treating the wounded as best he could, calling in coordinates for air support, while bullets snapped past his head and shrapnel tore through sandbags. He'd stayed until the extraction team arrived, until every wounded soldier had been loaded onto the helicopters, until the base was abandoned as planned rather than overrun as the enemy intended. They'd given him the Medal of Honor for that, President Reagan himself placing it around Victor's neck in a White House ceremony that felt surreal after the mud and blood and chaos. The medal sat in a drawer at home. Victor never wore it, never mentioned it, because the weight of what he'd done, and who hadn't survived, was heavier than any decoration. Duke's insistent pressure brought Victor back to the present. The parking lot solidified, became real again. His breathing slowed. The attack had been milder than usual, thanks to Duke's intervention. Victor sat in his car, hands on the steering wheel, considering his options. He could drive to another store, but the nearest one was an hour away, and he was exhausted from the effort of staying calm during Madison's interrogation. He could order online, but Duke needed food today, not in 2 days when shipping arrived. He was about to start the car when someone knocked on his window. David Ortiz, the store manager, stood beside the Honda, his face creased with concern. David had come to the floor after another employee reported the confrontation, had watched on security footage as Madison denied entry and made accusations, and then had seen Victor's license plate as the old man walked out. A veteran plate with a specific designation David recognized because his own father had one. "Sir," David said when Victor rolled down the window, "I'm so sorry. Please, will you come back inside? I need to make this right." Victor shook his head. "It's all right, son. I don't want any trouble." But David was already seeing Duke, seeing the proper service vest, seeing Victor's trembling hands and the signs of someone who just fought through something difficult. "Please, sir, I'm the manager, David Ortiz. What happened shouldn't have happened. Will you let me fix it?" Something in David's tone, the genuine remorse and respect, made Victor nod. He followed David back into the store, Duke at his side, where Madison stood at the counter with her arms crossed, confident she'd done the right thing. "Madison," David said, his voice carefully controlled, "this gentleman is a customer trying to purchase food for his service dog. Why was he denied entry?" Madison launched into her explanation about fake service dogs, about old people scamming the system, about her duty to enforce standards. David listened without expression, then turned to Victor. "Sir, may I see your documentation? Not because I doubt you," he added quickly, "but because I want my employee to understand what she missed." Victor pulled out his wallet, extracting his VA card. David took it, and his face changed as he read the designation printed there: 100% P&T, combat PTSD. Permanent and total disability rating, the highest level, reserved for veterans whose service-connected conditions were severe and lifelong. Behind the VA card was another item, a worn photograph protected in plastic. David pulled it out, and his breath caught. The photo showed a much younger Victor Chang in dress uniform, standing beside President Ronald Reagan in the White House. The president was placing a light blue ribbon with white stars around Victor's neck. The Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, given only for valor in action against an enemy force, for risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. David's hands shook as he held the photograph. He looked at Victor, seeing him truly for the first time, not just an elderly man with a service dog, but a living embodiment of heroism, someone who'd given everything and asked for nothing in return. "Madison," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you know what this is?" He held up the photograph. Madison glanced at it, shrugged. "Some old picture." "So what?" David's composure cracked. "This is Mr. Chang receiving the Medal of Honor from President Reagan. The Medal of Honor, Madison, the highest military decoration in this country, given to fewer than 3,600 people in our entire history." He turned back to Victor. "Sir, may I ask, what did you do to earn this?" Victor was uncomfortable now. The attention he'd avoided for decades suddenly focused on him like a spotlight. "It was a long time ago. Vietnam and then some other places. I just did my job." But David was reading the back of the photograph now, where someone, probably Victor's late wife, had written in faded ink, "Victor Chang, Medal of Honor, Fire Base Alpha, 1968, 8 hours alone, 23 wounded saved. You came home. I love you forever." David read it aloud, his voice breaking on the last words, and the store had gone completely silent. Customers stood frozen, some with tears already forming. 8 hours alone," David repeated. "You held a position by yourself for 8 hours." Victor nodded slowly, the memories pressing close despite his efforts to keep them distant. "The fire base was being overrun. We were supposed to evacuate, but we had 23 wounded who couldn't move fast enough. Someone had to stay, provide covering fire while the helicopters came back for them. I was the ranking NCO after the lieutenant got hit." He said it so matter-of-factly, as if volunteering to almost certainly die was just a logical decision. "I had good cover, plenty of ammunition. It made sense for me to stay." What he didn't say was that he'd been terrified, that he'd prayed harder in those 8 hours than in his entire life, that he'd written a goodbye letter to his wife in his head during brief moments when the firing paused. He didn't say that 3 times he'd thought he was dead, rounds so close he felt their heat, shrapnel cutting his uniform but somehow missing vital organs. He didn't say that he'd counted every helicopter that landed, every wounded soldier loaded aboard, that he'd known their names and faces and had promised himself that if he died, it would be after the last one was safely away. "The choppers came back for you?" David asked. Victor smiled slightly. "Eventually. I'd used up most of my ammunition by then. Was down to my sidearm. They sent in 2 gunships to suppress fire and grabbed me. I remember being pulled aboard and thinking I could finally sleep." David turned to Madison, and the look on his face made her step back. "You denied this man entry. You accused him of faking a disability. You suggested he was trying to bribe you. You humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient in my store." Madison's confidence was crumbling now, realization dawning that she'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. "I didn't know." "That's the point." David's voice rose, the frustration and anger he'd been controlling finally breaking through. "You didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask, didn't look, didn't give him the basic respect every customer deserves, let alone a veteran, let alone someone with a legitimate service animal, let alone... He stopped himself, breathing hard. "You're fired, Madison. Effective immediately. Give me your vest and name tag." Madison's face went white. "You can't fire me for enforcing policy." "You weren't enforcing policy. You were discriminating based on age and your own unfounded assumptions. This violates federal ADA law, company policy, and basic human decency. You're done." As Madison fumbled with her vest, hands shaking, David turned back to Victor. "Sir, I cannot apologize enough. Please let me get Duke's food on the house." In fact, he made a decision right there, the kind that came from deep conviction. "I'm giving you a year of free pet supplies. Whatever Duke needs, whenever he needs it, no charge. It's not payment, it's not charity, it's respect, it's acknowledgement. It's the least we can do." Victor protested, but David was firm, and eventually Victor accepted with the grace that defined him. David personally helped Victor select food, treats, toys, and supplies, loading them into the Honda while other customers watched in respectful silence. Some approached Victor afterward, shaking his hand, thanking him for his service with tears in their eyes. Victor accepted each thank you with quiet dignity, though the attention exhausted him more than the confrontation had. Madison left the store in humiliation, and her story didn't end cleanly. David reported the incident to corporate and the security footage of the confrontation. Madison's dismissive tone, her accusations, her refusal to even look at Victor's documentation became training material. Every PetSmart in the region used it as an example of what not to do, how discrimination can wear the mask of policy enforcement, how assumptions based on age or appearance can lead to profound injustice. Madison's face was blurred in the training videos, but she knew. Everyone in her social circle knew. The story spread through Phoenix retail circles, and job applications that had seemed promising suddenly went unanswered. She'd been so certain she was right, so convinced of her own judgment, that she'd never considered the possibility that the quiet elderly man knew more about service, duty, and earning the right to basic respect than she could imagine. Victor Chang returned to his routine, grateful for Duke's presence, for the dog's unerring ability to sense when the past threatened to overwhelm the present. The free supplies from PetSmart helped, though Victor had tried to decline. David Ortiz had insisted, and they developed an unlikely friendship, the younger man often asking Victor to coffee just to listen to stories about resilience, about choosing to stay when running was an option, about living with the weight of decisions made in impossible circumstances. David's father was a Vietnam veteran too, though he'd never talked much about his service, and through Victor, David began to understand some of what his father carried. The Medal of Honor photograph remained in Victor's wallet, carried not from pride but from practicality. His late wife had insisted he keep it, just in case, though she'd never specified what case might require proving his identity through heroism. Now he understood. The world was full of Madison Pierces, people who judged quickly and thought slowly, who assumed the worst based on appearances and the best based on their own self-perception. For people like Victor, who'd given so much and asked so little, who'd aged into invisibility despite their extraordinary pasts, documentation sometimes became necessary not to claim special treatment, but simply to claim the basic respect owed to any human being. Duke remained Victor's constant companion, the dog's training and devotion, providing stability that medication and therapy alone couldn't achieve. On bad days, when the memories pressed close and the hypervigilance that had kept Victor alive in combat made civilian life feel threatening, Duke was there, warm, solid, present. The dog didn't judge the panic attacks, didn't question why a grocery store could trigger the same physiological response as incoming fire, didn't grow impatient with the process of recovery that would never fully complete. Duke simply served, with the same dedication Victor had once shown to his brothers in arms, the same refusal to abandon someone in need that had earned Victor a medal he rarely thought about, but carried with him everywhere. In the end, Madison Pierce's dismissal became a strange kind of gift to the thousands of PetSmart employees who watched the training video, who learned from her mistake, who understood that behind every service dog was a story, behind every elderly veteran was a history, and that respect cost nothing but meant everything. If you believe service animals and their handlers deserve dignity and accommodation without interrogation, that veterans carry invisible wounds requiring visible support, and that age and appearance tell you nothing about a person's worth or history, subscribe to this channel. Share this story. Let it remind you to pause before judging, to ask questions before assuming, to remember that the quiet person with the service dog might have once held impossible ground while others escaped, might have chosen sacrifice over safety, might deserve so much more than your skepticism. Victor Chang held a fire base for 8 hours. The least we can do is hold open a door.